Hey, this is Jacob Alexander DeVaynes recording my midterm. My midterm topic is going to be Coco Chanel. She was a Nazi and an anti-Semitic. Does her relations matter today? And do we believe that it should affect the brand or no? Coco Chanel, she was a French designer for being the founder of the fashion house Chanel, and not as widely known. She was also a Nazi and an extremely anti-Semitic human being. Gabrielle Coco Chanel, a little bit of background on her. She was born August 19th, 1883 in Saumur, France. She grew up extremely poor, and when she was only 12 years old, her mother passed away. After her mother passed away, her father could not afford to take care of her and her sister. He ended up sending both of them to an orphanage, and they basically just had to fend for themselves. When they turned 18, they returned away from the orphanage, and Coco basically had to take care of her and her sister. Many people quote and say that she was a natural talent when it came to sewing and designing. She took up sewing and she became a seamstress. And then she met an extremely wealthy textile mogul named Etienne Balsan. They began dating and fornicating, and that was until she ended up being introduced to Balsan's friend, Arthur Capel. Both of them fell in love with her. She was gorgeous, she was beautiful, she was amazing, and they began to fight for her love. In the book Sleeping with the Enemy by Hal Vong, it quotes, "Eventually, after protracted negotiations, Balsan and Capel agreed to fund and share the cost of setting up Coco's business. She started by selling hats that she was already making for herself and for her friends. Capel covered the running costs, and Balsan provided the Paris premise. This is how she started and began funding her clothing line. She got the name Coco from the French quote, Qui va Coco, which was a song she became famous for singing in clubs when she had to support her and her sister financially. Chanel began to become very famous and pick up a lot of mainstream coverage through the 1920s and 40s, which is right at the beginning of World War II. In 1924, before the war started, Chanel ended up giving up 90% of her perfume line. 70% of it was given to Paul Wertheimer, who was a Jewish businessman. At the beginning of World War II, Chanel made her anti-Semitism extremely clear. She repeatedly expressed her disdain for the Jewish population. At the beginning of the war, Chanel closed her store stating that it, to quote, "It is not a time for fashion," which is a quote you can find in the book Sleeping with the Enemy by Hal Vong on page 132. She began to stay at the Hotel Ritz in Paris, which was a well-known and prominent Nazi hotspot. The top Nazi generals, the most important people in the Nazi army stayed there, and it was very well known. And in 1933, Chanel fell in love and began dating a German officer by the name of Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklage. And another quote from this absolutely amazing book. I read it before I even did this assignment. Recommend it. Sleeping with the Enemy, Coco Chanel's Secret War by Hal Vong. To quote, "The romance enabled Chanel to move into comfortable living quarters in Paris Hotels Ritz. Then, doubling as a German headquarters, and kept her firmly entrenched in high society, which was also infiltrated by German officers." Unquote. After the Nazi Party ended up seizing all Jewish property, which was a law put in by Hitler, she saw this as the perfect opportunity to try and steal back a large portion of her perfume company from the Jewish Wertheimer family. This family also, fun fact, produced one of her most famous fragrances, Chanel No. 5. When she tried to take back the company, the Wertheimers was already like 5 steps ahead. The brothers, which like the Wertheimer brothers who had the perfume company, had already fled to New York at the time, and they sold the company to one of their distant relatives who had no like Jewish relations and was also a Christian man who lived in France. That's when Chanel herself became a Nazi agent for Berlin in an exchange for her nephew being released from a prisoners of war camp. She went under the name of Agent F7124, and her code name was Westminster. During her time as a Nazi officer, Chanel was directly involved with the plan for the Third Reich, or Third Reich. That, you're a history teacher, so I'm assuming you know, that was the plan to basically like expand, it was the expansion of the Nazi power, and she was directly involved in the plan to take control of Madrid. Towards the end of the war, when it became clear that the Nazi Party was not going to win, Coco Chanel ended up fleeing to Switzerland so that she could avoid criminal charges for being a Nazi spy. This is one of the reasons. This brings me to another an extra point that I'm trying to make here. Doesn't matter today. This is one of the biggest talking points when talking about Coco's past, because she, under her own recognizance, fled to Switzerland to avoid criminal charges for being a Nazi spy, which means she knew what she was doing was wrong. She was tried multiple times, and someone, since she was a very high class, she was a very well-known person, like back in the day, extremely well-known, still very well-known today. Since she had many relations, someone bailed her out, and it was actually Winston Churchill. This is true, promise you. Did so much research on this, could not believe it. And yeah, she was able to evade and avoid being criminally charged, and that is how she then, after the war, after she fled, she retired from fashion, and 30 years later, she threatened to basically expose herself for being a Nazi. She threatened this on the Wertheimers because she knew that it would make the brand look bad, and she knew that like people would not want to buy it. If people knew that the creator of it was a Nazi, then they would not want to buy the product, and that would sink it downhill. So the two of them came to a decision. They agreed for her to stay quiet and not tell anyone, and they would continue paying for the rest of her living expenses for as long as she lived. And there was many more like pieces to this agreement, but that was one of the main pieces. That's when, 30 years later, she began getting back into fashion. To quote from PBS.org, actually, Coco Chanel, Fashion Designer, Nazi Informant by Melanie Albessani, to quote, from a French editor-in-chief, Marie Claire, observed a conversation with Chanel. To quote, Chanel's anti-Semitism was not only verbal, but passionate, demoting, and often embarrassing. Unquote. She was often given to anti-Semitic outbursts. This was well known at the time. This became a very much more well-known fact. She was said to be very hard to work with. She was said to be extremely anti-Semitic. Not only that, but racist, homophobic, xenophobic. Basically, like a white supremacist. Very traditional. And after a while, after Coco Chanel passed away, the Wertheimer brothers bought back the entire company. They now own around 90% of the company, and their net worth is in the billions now. Many people talk about, does this matter today? Should this affect the brand? And from Forbes.com, do Coco Chanel's Nazi connections matter from Fashion Today? From Olivia Pinnock. She states, of course, Chanel is not just a historical person, but is also a very, very successful and powerful brand that exists today. Much of the brand has been influenced by her name, but looking at the past, many people are thinking, should it still be supported? Many people do not believe that it should. Many people do not believe that this brand should be tainted by her name, by her past, just because it's her name. She's not the owner of it and does not profit from it. But many people also argue that since she's so well known and that is her name on the brand, people don't know the Worth Miners brothers. They know Gabriella Coco Chanel. That is my midterm. I'm leaving you with the question. Please answer. Do you believe that since her name is still on the cover of the brand and she is very well known, do you think that should affect the brand today? Personal opinion? Yeah. I think it should be well-known information. Thank you. This is the end of my midterm. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that I was able to quote things and put them out the way you wanted me to. This is the end of my midterm. This is not do not grade me on what I'm going to say now, because it's the end of it. I can share my Google Doc with you of my script, everything I wrote down with all my quotes and sources and everything. But thank you. Bye.